Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Hinson.
And I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. And we are here for our 5th installment of Season 1 of The Handmaid's Tale, Episode 5. We are looking at Faithful. And just a reminder what we're doing here. We're both doctors in social science, myself in history and anthropology, and Dr. Donnelly in sociology of religion. So our expertise of mine in historical imprisonment and resistance and confinement, and Dr. Donnelly in gender and religion, particularly in Protestantism, molds wonderfully in our ability to do academic analyses of these episodes. So we'll jump right in to episode 5, which starts with our friend Serena Joy, the commander's wife, who's concerned at this stage that our dear Offred is not pregnant yet, which we talked about already in previous videos, how this puts a lot of pressure on everybody involved when these ceremonies don't go according to plan. So she has now suggested to Offred that she have sex with Nick, who is our dear driver.
Who I call Eyebrows, because I never remember his name.
Who we are led to believe from Offglen could potentially be an eye. Working for the government. And this is in case, just on the off chance that Commander Waterford is sterile. Same day, later on, Serena leads Offred up to Nick's room and waits by the door, while Nick and Offred have really detached, unemotional, ceremony-esque sex. So way to go, Serena. Still don't think she's getting the whole picture here. We get some flashbacks that detail the beginning of June's relationship with her husband Luke and their meeting and courtship, and our girl Moira is back in it. At the grocery store, Offred finds the original Offglen. Rory Gilmore is back, although she is now called of Stephen. But she's like keeping to herself. She's a little reserved. And then during ceremony night, our favorite part of the evenings in Gilead, the commander touches Offred's thigh, like in preparation, and she freaks out. She's like, "Don't you ever do that again." In their ensuing conversation, the commander admits to a little bit of doubt over what they were doing. We thought we were building a better world. But he knew that better never means better for everyone, which is an extraordinarily magnanimous position to take for somebody who's in a position of power. So sorry your life's shit, but we knew somebody had to suffer. Thanks, buddy. Nick reveals, drum roll, that he isn't. And then Offred starts to talk to Stephen openly at a market about the resistance, which is called Mayday, the resistance group. Not the wisest move that our Offred has made. And then of Stephen, Emily, Roy Gilmore jumps behind the steering wheel of a truck and drives erratically around the plaza and kills a guard. So obviously she gets taken out pretty quickly and put in a black van, and we don't see her. And scene on off Stephen. Offglen. And then Offred returns back in the evening after this and is like, you know what, screw this. literally and figuratively, because she goes up to Nick's coach house, and the two of them kind of find each other through very passionate sex, in which Offred takes a lot of control back, and that's where the episode ends. It was illuminating. Over to you. First thoughts, Dr. Donnelly.
Yeah, so this thing's called Faithful, but it really should be called Resistance, like Sex as Resistance.
Yeah,
like,
that's our alternate title for this.
Yeah. Orgasms as resistance. Yeah. So the first thing that I've noted, like something that really hit me this episode, is that there's no kissing in Gilead. Like, it's like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. Like, she does everything but kiss on the mouth. So it struck me particularly at the end of the episode, but it's just so the quote I wrote down and circled about 7 times was from the commander, and it says, he said, "Love isn't real. It was never more than lust or a marketing campaign."
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's no, like on every level, no. Not only does it reduce love to sex and sex without joy or pleasure, it reduces human existence to transactional existence, which is like love is what powers our lives. Like that bonds human beyond logic and remains as active choice. It's what powers us, and to dismiss it so casually is astounding and yet completely necessary for the construction of this world. If they don't dismiss it out of hand, they can't do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So I get it, but it was like, I don't know, I just had to sit with that for a minute because it really was Gilead in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So there's a couple other things that they dropped in this episode, like where the hell are the colonies? Why do people go there? I think we'll probably come back to that. But I'd like to pause on the conversation that Offred has with the new Offglen. So not Emily, but like the new Offglen, because the new Offglen makes the point that the new world order of Gilead is better for her because what she had before Gilead wasn't stable. So this is at least stable. She knows she's getting food.
Yeah.
My guess is that she was homeless before this. She was potentially a sex worker against her desire at different points. There's some hints in that direction.
Yeah.
But that was one of those like, whoa.
Pause. I know. So we're going to put a pin in your opening point about the lack of intimacy and emotion because I have an appropriate rant when we get towards that end of the episode. An academically informed rant, but a rant nonetheless. But in going back to my notes about Offred's conversation with the new Offglen, I loved this mirroring of language between her and the commander, where the commander claims that those who formed Gilead, wanted to make the world better. Our initial introduction to it through Offred's eyes and emotions gives us a very limited and negative perspective. What the conversation with the Offglen number 2 reminds us is that all experiences, even those of imprisonment or confinement, happen on a spectrum. And what Offred sees as restrictive and oppressive, Offglen 2 sees as protection and safety and security and things that person, whoever she was before Gilead, had perhaps never experienced. And this scene provided, I think, much needed nuance because we lived through Offred's eyes and her narrative so much. And it sets up this fascinating dichotomy that removing emotion and pleasure and forcing women to focus on their biological imperative is either good or bad for society. And as always, we learn more about June's backstory and discover that she was convicted of adultery. So Luke was married and essentially forced her partner to leave his wife. So, like, kind of finagled that, coerced Luke into leaving, probably pretty willingly. But since,
rabbit, yeah,
it's problematic for sure. She's not our wonderful, perfect hero. She has many imperfections. But since we only have her internal monologue, I was really intrigued that they gave us this look at her that was like, you guys have really connected with her, but she's still a human being. You know, she's imperfect. So what did you make about what we learned about her in this episode? Did it change your opinion?
It did. I do like that she's more complicated than we thought she was, and therefore human. It allows us to breathe. But, I'm just not sure she's someone I would have wanted to spend time with. Like, even outside of this, like, extramarital affairs, I need to be honest, as a married person, are a challenge for me to empathize with. Not impossible, but a challenge, especially one. She was very, very cavalier about Luke's wife. And I looked across the couch at my husband and I was like, I wish she was a little bit more uncomfortable with the fact that he was married. Like,
didn't stop her at all.
I wish it bothered her a little bit. She hit me as fundamentally selfish, which is maybe why she works in this world where she must resist, because she doesn't really think of her connection to other people and the consequences of those connections. So if she wasn't so sure of her own self-importance, it's possible she would be brainwashed more.
Possible.
But yeah, I had to take a breath and be like, June, that wasn't cool.
Not my favorite.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the opening bit real quick, though. So Offred has sex twice with Nick in this episode. Yep. So once with wife in the room, and then once with her own agency, as you mentioned. So what do you think about that dichotomy of choice and not choice, and imprisonment and not imprisonment, and all of that? So
yes. So as you know me so well, this was really kind of the meat of the episode for me, and it was fascinating to watch this interplay between them. So really, I think the pivotal scenes that bookend the episode, really. We learn more of Stephen, formerly of Offglen 1, or Emily, or Rory Gilmore. And we advance the story of Offred in the resistance movement. But I think this balance of procreation and pleasure is so fundamental to understanding the role of women, and honestly, like, mechanisms of individual resistance. So I totally agree with you on Serena Joy. She is desperate almost to organize and then supervise their first sexual encounter. And it's palpable, you can feel it. She is like, it has to work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I am failing as a wife if the handmaid is not pregnant, which obviously, because she considers going outside the bounds of this sacred ritual that is fundamental to the theocracy. But she's like, you know what? If we have to go outside the ceremony, we do. Because of her involvement as the Rachel, she is complicit in whether it succeeds or fails. And she already suspects or thinks that her husband might be sterile. But since that word is forbidden, she has to go elsewhere for those options. But shifting to the second scene, we have Offred like actively confronting a society that believes that there is no value in emotion or pleasure or intimacy. And the very fact that they had sex in private without supervision is an act of resistance. But quite clearly her power and her resistance is expressed through taking control in the room, which we see her do as they're kind of dancing around, getting and learning in intimacy with each other until they get to the actual sex act. And while having sex, she takes over. She claims agency over her body through achieving climax and through having her own sexual pleasure. And if handmaids are imprisoned in their own bodies, not being able to enjoy any sensorial element of joy, happiness, sadness, emotion, nothing. They are just vessels for the survival of the species, and we've talked about this. So her decision to take agency and control over her body through sex with Nick is an act of resistance against the social system that controls her body, in direct resistance to the commander's claim that the only thing worth living for is fulfilling the biological imperative. It's a big middle finger to that whole core structure of Gileadian theology. And so we have this dichotomy encapsulated. And in the last episode, we were exposed to collective means of resistance, which we talked about through communion and communication. In this scene, we get a glimpse of the high risk potential for individual means of resistance. What the consequences of these actions will be, who knows? We will just have to wait and find out. But I think it's something you can conceptualize, but the more you understand about how humans resist imprisonment, the more powerful that scene becomes. It wasn't just about sex. It was that sex has been taken away as something that can only be about procreation. So reclaiming her body, reclaiming the act of performing sex with another person outside the bounds of the ceremony was massive. And I'm now going to take a deep breath and exhale. Rant concluded.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else to say. So
I think I covered everything.
I think you covered it all. I mean, this was another one where I think there's just the pieces are moving in the plot. but every time they pause for a minute, it's so rich that it really takes a little bit to unpack. But I think we're good on Faithful. I think we can put a pin in that and move on to the next chapter of the circus they've got for us in episode 6. So I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And I'm Dr. Hinson.
And we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and we will see you next episode. Bye.